welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host, Ruby, and I know it has been a while, everyone. It is good to be back. I know that you guys have been watching my gaming plays and watching the little music videos that I've been doing, but I am honestly happy to say that we have a new book called Tales of Heroes, Gods and Monsters, Native American Stories and Legends. Reading list and glossary of terms with a new introduction by Dr. Angelo Baca. But before we begin, I want to ask if you guys can please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and definitely leave a comment down below if you guys enjoy these videos, if you guys want to see more of the reading videos and when I'm pretty much reading different stories to you guys. The next book that we actually have, or that we'll probably be reading in sequence with the Tales of Heroes, Gods and Monsters, the Native American Stories and Legends, we'll actually be reading this book, but at the same time, when it's like spooky Sundays, or probably because it's gonna hit the month of October, we're gonna get into Spooky Creepy Long Island by Scott Lefebvre. I hope I said that name correct, but we're gonna be reading that, and the little intro to it, it says, take a tour of the myths, legends, and ghost stories of spirited Long Island, including the infamous Amityville, where murder and mayhem shocked a small town, abandoned and haunted lunatic asylums, the historically chilling witchcraft trials, creepy lighthouses, and the many merry hauntings. Shudder as you read over 35 haunting tales of Long Island's supernatural history. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely let me know. Let me know what you are looking forward to hearing about this book. And yeah, before we begin, grab a snack, grab a drink, sit back and relax, and let's get into it. Series Forward. Stretching back to the oral traditions of thousands of years ago, tales of heroes and disasters, creations and conquests have been told by many different civilizations in many different ways. Their impact sits deep within our culture, even though the detail in the tales themselves are a loose mix of historical record, transformed narrative, and the distortion of hundreds of storytellers. Today, the language of mythology lives with us. Our mood is jovial. Our continence is saturnine. We are narcissistic, and our modern life is hermetically sealed from others. The nuances of myths and legends form part of our daily routines and help us navigate the world around us. With its half-truths and biased reported facts, the nature of a myth is that its story is already known by most of those who hear it or read it. Every generation brings a new emphasis, but the fundamentals remain the same: a desire to understand and describe the events and relationships of the world. Many of the great stories are archetypes that help us find our own place, equipping us with tools for self understanding, both individually and as part of a broader culture. For Western societies, it is Greek mythology that speaks to us most clearly. It greatly influenced the mythological heritage of the ancient Roman civilization and is the lens through which we still see the Celts, the Norse, and many of the other great peoples and religions. The Greeks themselves learned much from their neighbors, the Egyptians, an older culture that became weak with age and incestuous leadership. It is important to understand that what we perceive now as mythology had its own origins in perceptions of the divine and the rituals of the sacred. The earliest civilizations in the crucible of Middle East, in the Sumer of the 3rd millennium BCE, are the source of which many of the mythic archetypes can be traced. As humankind collected together in cities for the first time, developed writing and industrial scale agriculture, started to irrigate the rivers and attempted to control rather than be at the mercy of its environment, humanity began to write down its tentative explanations of natural events, of floods and plagues, of disease. Early stories tell of gods or godlike animals in the case of tribal societies such as African, Native American, or Aboriginal cultures, who are crafty and use their wits to survive. And it is it is reasonable to suggest that these were the first rulers of the gathering people of the earth, later elevated to godlike status with the distance of time. Such tales became more political as cities vied with each other for supremacy, creating new gods, new hierarchies for their pantheons. The older gods took on primordial roles and became the preserve of creation and destruction, leaving the new gods to deal with more current, everyday affairs. Empires rose and fell, with Babylon assuming the mantle from Sumeria in the 1800s BCE, then, in turn, to be swept away by the Assyrians of the 1200s BCE. Then the Assyrians and the Egyptians were subjugated by the Greeks by the Romans, and so on, leading to the spread and assimilation of common themes, ideas, and stories throughout the world. The survival of history is dependent on the telling of good tales, but each one must have the feeling of truth, otherwise it will be ignored. Around the firesides or embedded in a book or a computer, the myths and legends of the past are still the living materials of retold myth, not restricted to an exploration of origin. Now we have devices and global communications that give us unparalleled access to a diversity of traditions. We can find out about Native American, Indian, Chinese, and tribal African mythology or religions in a way that was denied to our ancestors. We can find connections match the archaeological regions, the religion, and the mythologies of the world to build a comprehensive image of the human experience that is endlessly fascinating. The stories in this book provide an introduction to the themes and concerns of the myths and legends of their respective cultures, with a short introduction to provide a linguistic, geographic, and political context. This is where the myths have arrived today, but undoubtedly over the next millennia, they will transform again whilst retaining their essential truths and signs. General Editor Jake Jackson. Introduction and further reading. Yaate Angelo Baka Yinishi. Translation. Hello, my name is Angelo Baka. I am introducing myself in the traditional Navajo way, using my Navajo clans to identify myself and say who my relatives are in my kin networks of our communities. My clans are the Red Bottom people, Hopi people, Bitter Water and Mexican people clans. As a Navajo resident of San Juan County, I learned about our histories in the broader Montezuma Creek, Enith, Utah region. I have lived in Blanding, Enith, and Monument Valley, Utah my entire life. Most importantly, I bring an intimate familiarity with the region's culture, history, and language, mostly Navajo and Hopi, including Zuni, Ute, Ute Mountain, Ute, and other nations of the broader Colorado Plateau. As someone raised by Navajo grandparents, I am blessed to know our culture, traditions, language, and ceremonies, which are the foundation of who I am in the world today, and can trace my lineage all the way back to the beginning of my ancestors. I am a Navajo and Hopi filmmaker and scholar. I like to make documentary films because they reflect the world's reality and the problems we must fix as people who coexist in the world together. However, it has dawned on me that I am in fact a traditional storyteller. I just use the mediums of film and video. I'm carrying on an indigenous tradition, just as my ancestors would have done back in their days. As Native American filmmaker and scholar Beverly Singer notes in Wiping the War Paint Off the Lens, 2001, traditional Native American storytelling practices and oral histories are a key source of our recovery of our authentic identity. Singer identifies how these practices, particularly storytelling, contribute to Native American priorities in our culture and identity. In my research, I use these as a way to aid protection of the sacred Bears Ears landscape, practicing our traditions and ceremonies, and revitalizing our culture and language. My graduate research consisted of analyzing visual media narratives and representation by the Ute Indian tribe, Hopi, Daine, Navajo, Utah Mountain Ute, and Zuni nations of the Bears Ears National Monument, a protected area in southeastern Utah. From the moment of the proclamation of the monument through the subsequent administration, the Bears Ears National Monument was established on 28 December 2016. In 2017, one of the first acts of the next sitting president was to reduce this national monument significantly from 1.35 million acres to 220,000 acres, roughly 200,000 acres. So roughly over 230,000 acres and 85% illegal land reduction. Sorry about that, I know the numbers got confusing for a minute. But onward. It was the first time a national monument was cut by a sitting president using an executive order carried out without the approval of Congress. This event mobilized the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, the dynamic progress activism at a grassroots community, intra-community, national and international level emerged. Part of the strategy for protecting sacred indigenous lands includes the media narratives that we help to shape. My film work and research focused on using narratives about Bears Ears with the surrounding communities to educate the wider general public. Centrally, it is about storytelling and education, reflecting who we are as the indigenous people of Bears Ears and why it matters to us and should matter to everyone. At first, when asked to write an introduction to this Native American myths book, I was unsure if I was qualified or if it made sense for me to comment on the oral traditions as a mostly dedicated filmmaker. However, I soon changed my mind when I remembered that storytelling is a family tradition. It has been an honor to discuss the importance and utmost value of storytelling and oral traditions in indigenous cultures, such as ours in the Navajo Nation and beyond. Personal history of family storytelling. My grandfather, Hugh Yellowman, was a traditional storyteller who shared Navajo stories during the winter seasons. He was known for his ceremonial and traditional knowledge and sought to participate in local and regional cultural activities requiring his expertise. Hugh's handmade moccasins were highly sought after in the Southwest's Four Corners region, consisting of the four states of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, a traditional territory that intersects to form four perpendicular border corners. Navajo families and folklore academics alike respected his wisdom and would seek his counsel. Barre Tolkien, 1935 to 2018, an academic from Utah State University, became a lifelong friend of the Yellowman family. While working prospecting for uranium in the remote region of southeastern Utah in the 1950s, in the desert he found himself disoriented, tired, dehydrated, and sick. He almost died alone, were it not for my grandfather, who found him and brought him back to the family hogan. There, he woke up from his sickness and saw that the entire community was there to sing him back to health in a ceremony. He credited Yellowman for saving his life. Tolkien collaborated with the Navajo community, learned the language, attended ceremonies and cultural gatherings, and would eventually, alongside Hugh Yellowman, become a collaborative partner in gathering stories from the Navajo culture, acknowledging Hugh as an equal in his folklore pursuits. His colleagues heavily criticized Tolkien's work as a folklorist because he refused to accept that indigenous informants were not to be considered equals or accorded the same respect as other knowledge holders, such as professors in academia. When Navajo families requested to have Tolkien's research material returned, he did not hesitate to explain in Native American Oral Traditions, 2001, "It remains for us and for our many colleagues engaged in the study of Native American oral traditions to continue opening up the mutually responsible dialogues that will bring forth the hundreds of other tribal literatures and languages of America." Both of these brilliant men have walked on now and leave us with a rich collection of stories and adventures in Tolkien's published books, which cover the course of nearly half a century. Tolkien, along with Yellowman family, believed in collaboration on equal and respectful terms with his indigenous and non-indigenous colleagues. Oral traditions of Native Americans. Oral traditions are perhaps the last bastion of authentic Native American and indigenous identity, representation, and presence in our increasingly narrative-saturated world, filled with social media, internet content, and competing real-world and fake news sources. Technology radically shifted the ability to make and share stories, giving us the tools to share as many stories as possible. With new sophisticated versions of artificial intelligence, humans are increasingly left out of the equation with each successive day. As this tech evolves, non-human storytelling gets better and better, but storytelling will always be a human endeavor. As traditional storyteller and Lower Ilhua Sklamal tribal elder Roger Fernandez explains at a speaking event, Native American storytellers share vital knowledge with RISD students, March 18th, 2023. Before there was the internet, there was television. Before television, there was radio. Before radio, there were books. Before books, there was storytelling. At a time when we are all told to use a microphone and a camera to share our thoughts individually, we can look to the past when the world was about our collective survival, knowledge, and wisdom. Technology is more accessible than it has ever been, but only requires a short attention span for quick bursts of storytelling. Increasingly, it is harder to stay focused with longer stories and listen deeply just as our ancestors did. During storytelling, at the first annual Indigenous Storytelling event at Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, Roger Fernandez began his storytelling set by addressing the audience directly, while holding his traditional drum and projecting his voice loudly, saying, "I won't be using the microphone to tell these stories. I don't want to put my spirit through a machine." Reimagining this storytelling event at Rhode Island School of Design, we wanted to keep it as close to original Indigenous culture protocols as possible, such as performing storytelling in the winter season. Commonly agreed as the best time to do so, in Indigenous communities, winter is the time to share stories and food, reflect on the year while contemplating the coming new spring season, and pondering the histories and lessons passed down from generation to generation. As such, we also wanted to limit the use of technology and requested that attendees not record video, write, or document the stories. Still, they were allowed to listen and draw, sketch, and otherwise create during the storytelling, to let the creative energy express itself in whatever form it would take. We wanted the students and community members to feel and imagine the stories connected with them. Many of these creations were given to our guest storytellers as gifts, a form of reciprocity in acknowledging their time and energy to share stories that spanned generations, reaching ears not from their culture for the first time. We wanted to honor these storytellers as traditional knowledge holders on equal and respectful grounds, as with other artists who are experts, professors, and recognized specialists inside and outside of the academy. Now, as I teach Native American oral traditions, Native American film and media, and an introduction to Indigenous philosophy at RISD, I realize every Indigenous teacher I have ever had contributed to me, accumulating the stories and experiences of those teachers, elders, and mentors, making me who I am today. I am merely an extension of their teachings and wisdom. Luckily enough to be able to share and teach them to young people now. What they poured into me is a fraction compared to the other oral traditions and teachings I learned from childhood into adulthood, giving me strength and direction to survive an uncertain world impacted by the external forces of a violent settler colonial history, theft of traditional territories, and greedy land rushes to take the world's last remaining natural resources from the places that indigenous people call home. Indigenous storytelling contemporaries like me and other Native colleagues are the living manifestation of the prayers of our ancestors for what they wanted for their future children. A world of stories. The world is a collection of stories. Our realities become colored by our beliefs, which are then reinforced by our stories. When these stories are passed down from generation to generation, they also pass along the realities of ancestors long gone. Yet in many indigenous cultures, those ancestors are never far away. So, we are not alone in this life. Stories of our loved ones and heroes and villains live in these narratives. We might be able to ask the same questions as our ancestors in their time. If I were in the same position as the character in this story, what would I do? The more we learn and know our own stories, the more we know our place. They are the constellation of stars that guide us in the night of our contemporary misinformation darkness. In today's published academic literature, stories of indigenous people are rarely told from their own perspectives. Often in the fields of folklore and oral histories, interviews document the stories that are known only in the hearts and minds of the storytellers of these native cultures. In early ethnology collection efforts, along with many other salvage ethnography projects, much was made of field workers who went out to Indian tribes before they disappeared or vanished as modernity encroached upon them. Scottish anthropologist and folklorist Lewis Spence states in The Myths of the North American Indians, 1989, many treatises are the utmost value on the ethnology, mythology, and tribal customs of the North American Indians, have been issued by this conscious and enterprising State Department. These are written by men who possess first-hand knowledge of Indian life and languages, many of whom have faced great privations and hardships in order to collect the material they have published. Yet, it is important to note that the material they collected was often done in return for monetary compensation or some form of payment. Academia and government work could be a secondary source of income for storytellers, whether authentic or not. As time went on, story sharing included different modalities. In some cases, documentation in audio recordings or other forms like video is applied as a tool in oral traditions that are supplementary to stories. These tools help to do this work, but they can never replace the face-to-face interactions of oral traditions, or we risk losing the nuances and details accompanying stories and the knowledge gained from this necessary contact with other human beings. Indigenous intellectual properties are indigenous oral traditions. Such content belongs to indigenous peoples, particularly tribal nations. In many traditional art forms, like pottery and basketry, there are certain aspects that may be headed or led by certain family groups, clanships, communities, or societies. This may require specific cultural knowledge belonging to those groups. How do we know what songs and prayers must be said when we harvest certain materials like plants, paints, and medicines? What is the responsibility of the harvester to reciprocate a mutually beneficial relationship with these living landscapes in exchange for these gifts? Consider what else might be lost in translation when communicating the story to a live audience of listeners. The, ar- the articulation of vast sums of knowledge is told through different lenses, and holders of the stories differ from those who held them before. Each storyteller has a distinct style and delivery, varied strengths and abilities to tell a story in a way that isn't like anyone else. Sometimes storytellers have a different take and interpretation of the stories altogether. Author Ella E. Clark, in Indian Legends of the Pacific Northwest, Volume 18, 1953, writes, "A skillful Indian storyteller is actor as well as narrator. His facial expressions are lively, his eyes twinkle. He gestures not only with his hands, but with his feet. He changes his voice to fit the characters. When one of his characters sings, the storyteller sings. Sometimes a tale that was delightful when I heard it lacked life when put on paper, for the dramatic quality of the person who related it had been lost. How many versions of the Raven or Coyote stories exist in the world, and have traveled extensively across geographies, trade networks, and generation? Navajos say we will keep our identity and culture alive as long as the stories are wet with our breath. A people without their stories and origins are without a history and doomed to repeat it. We realized a long time ago that our lineages and ancestors and the stories that accompany them are essential to carry with us wherever we go. Our embodied selves are given animation and dynamism through our breath and the literal wind of life that inhabits our bodies. Tolkien said in Dynamics of Folklore 1996, basically, we can say that a clear delineation of genre or structure of a folk item is one small part of understanding a folk performance. Without the whole live context and the comment of the performers, it is unlikely that we will ever get very close to understanding or even seeing the dynamics that underlie the traditional process. If we don't say these stories with our own breath and mother tongues, the power of these stories will lack efficiency. We will write them down, but must not forget to perform and share them. We must honor the spirit that moves us and talks from within, which is the ageless connection of what every human experiences when they are a five-fingered being, Adina Bila Ashlai. These oral traditions are no less adventurous and timeless in their relevance. We have all battled the same foes before in human history, seemingly insurmountable antagonists such as hunger, greed, violence, selfishness, or death. Native American storytelling takes us on these journeys through their eyes, yet it is a human experience that translates the enormity of life across cultures in all its abstract forms, which we can make more tangible and less frightening by knowing it through stories. If we have heard a story hundreds of times before, it is a different experience to revisit it anew, with time and distance away from it. One has accumulated experiences, histories, and outlook on life, where they once heard or read a story before. It does not land the same as it once did. Like a good book by a well-known author or a popular beloved classic movie, it means different things to us at various stages of our life. And this is where we are going to leave it, my dear friends. Tune in next video, for then we will be reading Representation and Perspective. This has been Ruby, signing off.